So as Denise mentioned, I started working with the Canadian Association for Equality last November and have been primarily researching and writing research briefs on men's issues. Although my time researching is a little bit limited, so I'm not definitely an expert on these issues, I have some information and some insights and things that I have learned in the past few months that I'd love to share with you this evening. My first research brief was on the negative and detrimental effects of demonizing men in the media, which I will speak to briefly. And I'm currently working on my second research brief on misandry in the policy and law arena. So prior to just diving into the information bit, I'd like to just speak to my motivation for being a part of the She for He campaign and for being a part of the Canadian Association for Equality. For me, gender equality should not be a war. It's not a war. It's not us versus them. It's all of us together. And I think that stems from the fact that when I think of men, I don't think of men as my enemies. I think of them as my brother, my father, my husband, and those are the people that you share most of your life with. And I mean, if you don't care for them, then I can't even understand why you would try to see them as enemies. In addition to that, I also believe that gender equality, in order for it to be a successful movement and an accomplishment on both parts, we need to understand that we need fair outcomes for both men and women. So this does not mean men climbing on women to succeed or women climbing on men to succeed, but rather the issues of both vulnerable men and women need to be addressed. So men are victims and have encountered and can encounter situations which render them vulnerable. And they are deserving of help, and they are deserving of help centers and resources to help them move past these moments in their lives. Touching back on my first research brief, the main points that I would like to zone into is that negative and flawed images of men are perpetuated by most genre of popular culture, and this means books, television, movies, greeting cards, comic strips, ads, commercials, and more. And as we all know, media discourses are powerful and they do shape the perspectives of societal attitudes. And if the media tends to minimize and demonize the men in our lives, then really what we're doing is that we're laughing at victims who are men. We are laughing at male victims who have gone through physical abuse, who have encountered sexual abuse, verbal abuse, emotional trauma. And we are encouraging this behavior and also leading male victims to believe that they deserved what they encountered. Demonizing men and reinforcing these harmful stereotypes about males and masculinity and male victimization leads to negative consequences, not just for men, but also for women and for gender relations alike. My second project looks at misandrous policies and laws, which is a very broad area, and I will just try to touch specifically on the criminal justice systems and the civil court system. That is what I'm looking at right now. And I'm looking at issues such as sentencing rates and bias against fathers in the courts, male victims of sexual assault, and more, and just trying to understand the way that they are treated in comparison to women. So obviously gender inequality exists, and certainly men do play the role of the oppressor or the offender at times. However, casting an entire gender in this light is damaging to society. And the resounding sentiment emerging from academic statistics and committee reports is that men are unfairly treated procedurally by police, courts, and correctional services. Our criminal justice system and our family courts have been permeated by incorrect myths regarding the nature of men, and have resulted in unfair results in sentencing rates between male and female offenders, as well as for fathers seeking custody for their children or fathers contributing to child support men fighting as victims in domestic violence cases, men fighting as victims of sexual assault, and so much more. Recently, an assistant law professor at the University of Michigan, Sonia Starr, found that men are given much higher sentences than women convicted for the same crime in federal court. The 2012 study, very recent, called Estimating Gender Disparities in Federal Criminal Cases, found what has been actually repeatedly seen in academics before, that men receive sentences that are 63% higher on average than their female counterparts. It also found that females arrested for a crime are significantly less likely to avoid charges and convictions entirely, and twice as likely to avoid incarceration if convicted of the crime. This, for me, was a bit shocking when I came across this fact, and what I needed to know immediately was why. Why is this happening? And of course, there has been theoretical research to address this question, and a lot of it leads back to these harmful stereotypes that I was speaking to earlier. There are two main theories that address this question: the Chivalry Thesis, which dates back to the 1970s, and the theory that looks at judicial decision-making. I'll start with the Chivalry Thesis, and what it actually says is that it's premised on cultural stereotypes about gender and asserts that gendered stereotypes about men and women both influence sentencing outcomes according to the sex of the offender. Women are deemed in need of protection and not fully responsible for their actions. They will result in preferential treatment for female offenders from predominantly male police officers, prosecutors, and judges. The theory based on judicial decision-making proposes that the relationship between gender and sentencing is the byproduct of human error expressed in judicial outcomes. And what this means is that, what it's really saying is that judges, because they are limited in the amount of time that they can spend on individual cases, they tend to receive incomplete information with regards to the case and the defendant's case. So with this time constraint means that the judge and other court players make these contextual attributions about the defendant's culpability and character, and they base this on three focal points: blameworthiness, dangerousness, and practical constraints. So while they may attribute certain risks to one gender more than the other, this will definitely lead in some kind of preferential treatment being shown based on gender. Females have tended to be viewed as less of a risk, and males have been seen as more culpable or more likely to be dangerous and have received higher sentences, as mentioned before. So what I have learned and what I wanted to share today was that these gender stereotypes, which are so far, entrenched in our society, in our media, the way we see each other, are having this horrible negative effect on the men that we love when they encounter the civil court systems, when they encounter the system as a father, when they encounter the system as a victim of sexual abuse. And to me, that is unforgivable. And I can't imagine not being a part of this movement or trying to do my best to correct this gender disparity. Thank you very much.